Let's have a chat, shall we? I'm in a talkative mood this morning. Um, recently I watched that documentary that they did on Miss Cleo. And, we can debate forever on whether or not Miss Cleo was authentic or whether she was, fake or whatever the case may be. Here's the thing. According to the documentary, and again, I take the documentary with a grain of salt because they had Raven Simone speaking on there, and I'm like, what the fuck you know about Miss Cleo? Shit, you're a millennial. I mean, that was in my heyday. What do you know? You were a child, you know? But anyway, the documentary can be looked at in two ways or three. You can look at it as being a lie, you can look at it as being the truth, or you can look at it as being a little bit of both. Because, and I look at it as maybe a little bit of both because there were people that really loved Cleo. And there were those who gave her the side eye for various reasons. And I'm not going to get into it. You can look at the documentary on HBO Max if you want to see it. But nevertheless, it was very interesting whether or not the documentary was accurate or based in truth. It was interesting, and did. I'll tell you one thing that it did shed truth on. There's one truth that no one can deny, and that is that Miss Cleo was used and she was abused. And the thing is that people can get mad all they want and say, well, she was a scam artist. There are some people that said that she was not authentic when it came to who she was as a person. Because some people say that her accent was not a real Jamaican accent. And there are Jamaicans that have even said that. And I'm not going to argue with them because I don't want no smoke from them damn Jamaicans. I don't want no smoke from my Jamaican sisters and brothers. You know what I'm saying? I don't want no smoke from y'all. You know what I'm saying? But, well, I don't really care. I'm just saying it for the sake of being funny. But I'm not going to contradict. If Jamaicans say, I'm not Jamaican, and I love their accents. They have beautiful accents. I love it. Just like I love British accents. I think they have beautiful accents as well. But, if the Jamaicans are saying that is not an authentic Jamaican accent, I think she spoke more of what they would call patois. Patois. I think that's how you pronounce it, patois, and that's not really a Jamaican dialect. And if I'm wrong, forgive me, but nevertheless, even Jamaicans have said that was not an authentic Jamaican accent that Cleo had. Okay, get it, got it, no problem with that. There were people who really loved her in her personal life who said that she was a real spiritualist and that she could channel spirits. And if I'm not mistaken, Cleo looked like she was involved in some type of Orisha type of energies. If I'm not mistaken, she was involved. She was involved in some real, in her personal life. Now, how did she come into that? I don't know, because there's some conflicting, let's just say some conflicting energies as to where she was really born. Cleo claims that she was born in Jamaica and was brought to, I believe, Los Angeles when she was a little girl. Now, other people say, no, she was not born in Los Angeles. I mean, she was not born in Jamaica. She was born somewhere in the Midwest. I think they said maybe Kansas. That's what they were trying to say. So I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that Cleo was done wrong. They did her wrong. Cleo was not all wrong. They did her wrong. Because what people don't understand is this. Cleo was the face. She was the face of that psychic network. When you called that psychic network, you never got to talk to Miss Cleo because, child, I used to call it. You never got to talk to Miss Cleo. You always got someone else. And usually it was a white person, and nothing wrong with that, but usually that was the case. You never got to talk to Miss Cleo. And even in the documentary, people who used to work for that same psychic network, they even told you in the documentary that when people would ask to speak to Miss Cleo, they would pretend like they were going to get her, and then they would come back to the phone and say, "Oh, she's not available right now." Cleo was never taking calls. Now, maybe the few calls that she took, well, I take that back. Maybe she did take some. Yes, she did. Maybe she took a few calls when they did the infomercials. Sometimes during the late night during the 90s, when they did those infomercials, Cleo would come on and she would be taking calls. But she said that those calls that she took, she was giving them the information that Spirit told her to give them. Okay? So, I mean, some people say that she was an actress. Maybe. I don't know. But here's the point that I'm making. I just wanted to get all that out the way, just to get all the details out of the way, because there were people that loved her. There were people that gave her the side eye. And I think it's like this. I think the documentary was lies, truth, and a little bit of both. How about that? Lies, truth, and a little bit of both. I'm going to leave it at that. But there's one thing in it that cannot be denied. That is definitely true. Cleo was not the owner, nor was she the creator of that psychic hotline. That psychic hotline was created by two men who were not psychic, who were not spiritual. They may have been carnal wizards or wizards of carnality, but wizards of carnality have no connection to real spirit. And what they did was they had them a eccentric, talented Black woman. Let's say Cleo was an actress. Let's say she wasn't no real psychic. Let's say she was an actress. Acting, when you're an authentic actress, that is a form of channeling. People don't understand that. That is why a lot of times actors end up going a little cuckoo, because they channel different energies. They channel different people in a lot of these movie roles that we don't even know exist. A lot of those movie roles that people be playing, that they play in a lot of these movies, a lot of those people actually existed, but we don't know it. We don't know it. Same thing happened. I've talked about this before. The same thing happened to Faye Dunaway and Jessica Lange when they played Joan Crawford. Their careers took a deep dive because Joan Crawford, that was a interesting woman and an interesting energy to play. And anyone that has played that role, anyone that has portrayed her, it ended their career. It did it with Faye Dunaway. It did it with Jessica Lange. After Jessica Lange played in Feud, she went downhill. Jessica Lange was the business. Shit. So was Faye Dunaway. She was the diva of Hollywood, the queen bee. But after she played Joan Crawford, her star began to fade. And that's because they're channeling spirits. They are channeling spirits. And they're channeling energies. And sometimes they can't get those energies off of them. That's what happened to Heath Ledger. So let's say, for the sake of argument, Miss Cleo was an actress. And maybe she was channeling some type of Jamaican big mama female energy. Maybe she was channeling that. But at the end of the day, she was not the owner of that network. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe I have to go back and listen to what she said. But she did an interview a few years before she died. And if I'm not mistaken, Cleo said the most she ever made was $1,000 off of that network. Now, that's what she said. But at the end of the day, do you know how much those two men made? Stephen Fetter and Peter Stoltz, they were cousins. And they came up with this idea to create this psychic network. You know how much they made? They made close to $1 billion. Cleo didn't see any of that money. And even she said in the interview she did before she died, she said, people talking about all this money I made. She was like, where is it? Because she said, I want to know where it's at. She said, I want to know, where is this $100 million that I'm supposed to have? Cleo didn't have no $100 million. I believe her when she say that. She was not living as a person who had $100 million. Okay? She wasn't, I don't think that was true. Okay? I don't believe that was true. But the point that I'm making is this, now that I got all of that out the way, this is just another prime example of how black women get exploited and how black women get used and abused in not only that industry, but just in general. Just like I was talking about in the last video, now the story is coming out more and more that this young man in Alabama murdered that young woman, Darius Miles. He murdered that young woman because she did not want him. The girl had a boyfriend. She was with her boyfriend. And Darius Miles tried to talk to her and she didn't want him. And he shot her. That's the same thing that happened to my cousin a few months ago, back in October. My cousin that was murdered. A guy murdered him because he was dating his ex-girlfriend. And he murdered my cousin. And I haven't really talked about it because it's really painful to talk about. My cousin was dating a girl. Her ex-boyfriend saw them together. He got mad and then he murdered my cousin. But black men are innocent, right? Child by. But that's another story. But this is a prime example of the exploitation of black women. And Cleo is an example of that. She's an example of that. She was exploited. She was used, abused, and thrown aside. And then she died. She died at a very young age. She was only 53 when she died of colon cancer. But I tell you one thing. People can say whatever they want about Miss Cleo. They can say she was a fake. They can say she was a fraud, whatever the case may be. You know, so, me personally, I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that she had practices. Like I said, I think she practiced some type of Orisha type of energy, if I'm not mistaken. But one thing about it, Cleo had people that did really love her. And there were some people that said some really, really beautiful things about Miss Cleo in that documentary. She had godsons. She had, I didn't know, I might have known and forgotten, you know, so much has happened, but I did not know that Miss Cleo was a lesbian. I didn't know she was a lesbian. And she had relationships with two Caucasian women, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. But the fact of the matter is that Miss Cleo was loved by the people that knew her intimately. Yeah, she may have done some shit that wasn't right, because I heard she stole some money from some people at some performing arts school in Seattle, Washington. And, you know, those people gave her the side eye, you know, but we also have to understand too, Cleo had a hard life. I don't think she came from a very good background, and they were, you know, they were exploring that in the documentary. They were talking about how she came from a very, very difficult background. I believe she was raped when she was 11 years old by a family, a friend of the family, who had been trying to assault her for a minute, and then he finally was able to do it. And she wanted to commit suicide, according to according to one of her friends, she wanted to commit suicide at the age of 7. So I don't know. I don't know. Her personal life and who she really was, where she came from, whether she was Jamaican or not. Now, a lot of Jamaicans say that ain't no real Jamaican accent, and I'm not going to argue with them about that because they would know. So I ain't got nothing to do with that. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at it from the perspective of how she was exploited and how black women's image get exploited all the time. They're doing it right now to Whitney Houston. They're doing it right now to Whitney Houston. Making these weird biographical films. That biographical film, I don't even have to look at it to know that it's some bullshit. I don't even have to look at it to know that it's some bullshit. And I can tell you right now, Whitney ain't for that. She ain't for that shit. That's why it's coming up, because she coming through right now. She ain't for that. That's some bullshit. That's some bullshit. Some pure bullshit. And they're trying to turn it into something that it's not. Her and Robin Crawford were friends. They had a sexual experience, but it was not what people thought. It was an experience. And sometimes the lines get blurred between experience and love. Just because you experiment or experience something doesn't mean that you love it. You know how many guys I've had sexual experiences with who were just experimenting, and these are so-called straight men. Sometimes they just want to know what it's like to get their dick sucked by another dude, and then they go on about their business, and I'll never hear from them again, and that's fine. I had an experience like that a couple of years ago. This fine ass motherfucking Latino guy. He was Latino, fine as shit, fine as a motherfucker. I was like, oh, he said, I just want to experience it. He was fine as a motherfucker. And I said, well, let me be. I said, I'll be your guinea pig, child. I don't mind, honey. Shit, he was fine as shit. I did not mind. But nevertheless, it was an experience. You feel what I'm saying? But you always see this type of exploitation go on with black women. You always see this. And now, and they did that to Miss Cleo. Those two men, Stephen Fetter and Peter Stoltz, not only did they steal money from vulnerable people who were calling their psychic network, they were exploiting the image and likeness of Miss Cleo. And one time when Miss Cleo, she didn't even own her name, Miss Cleo. She could not go on to other venues and make money because they owned her name. And whenever she tried to, they would try to sue her, or they would sue the venue or whatever project that she was doing. I think she went on to something. She did some type of television program as Miss Cleo or something like that. And they sued her because they owned her likeness and her image. They owned the Miss Cleo brand. And she really did not make a whole lot of money off of that, according to this documentary. Now, again, I'm taking it as a grain of salt. But what I do know is this happens to black women all the time. Black women are always exploited. And they'll sit up and make money off of you, your likeness, and your image. They'll make $1 billion industry off of you. Same thing with the Aunt Jemima pancakes. Now they call it Pearl Millings. Well, who was Pearl Millings? Who is her descendants? Was that who the Aunt Jemima face was? Pearl Millings? Who are her descendants? They need to be getting money. Same thing with Henrietta Lacks. They stole her organs. They stole her body parts. They stole her cells. Made money off of them. Made medicines off of the genetic sequence of her DNA. They do this to black women all the time. All the time. And they did the same exact thing to Cleo. That is what I'm talking about. Whether she was a fraud or actress or not, whatever. I ain't worried about that. What I'm worried about and what I'm looking at is how black women's image is always used to put money in the pockets of men all the time. What black women need to start doing is when these motherfuckers start doing shit like that, you need to start doing work on their motherfucking asses. You need to start doing that spiritual work on them motherfuckers and fucking they motherfucking asses up. And stop letting them take your motherfucking image and your likeness and making money off of stuff. Then you can't even go out here and make no goddamn money because they're going to try to fucking sue you when it's your fucking image. That's some fucked up ass, demonic, evil ass motherfucking shit. Black women need to start putting their foot on a lot of these men's necks, black or white men or whomever, making money off of your image. And I don't care if it could be from the highest level down to the middle, down to the lowest level. I remember one time I was dating this guy years ago. I don't fuck with him anymore. And he told me he was a pimp, right? And he told me, I said, well, how much do you get? I said, so I said, okay, if one of your girls make $100, how much do you give them? And how much do they get? You know what that motherfucker said to me? Oh, I'll give them $10. I looked at that motherfucker. Are you what? $10? Now this was years and years ago, y'all. Years ago. This is years ago. This is back in the early 2000s. $10 out of 100? Motherfucker, you crazy. But this is exactly what's happening to black women. This is exactly what's happening to black women all the time. Black women are constantly exploited in this way. In Hollywood, in the music industry. So that's really what I took away from the Cleo the documentary on Cleo. That's what I got out of it. That she too was a victim. As crazy as that may sound to some people, she was a victim too. Because ultimately she died, you know, I don't think she had much money when she died, but there were a lot of people around her who claimed that they loved her, you know, including her ex-girlfriends, her godsons, you know. And one person said that the reason she was able to fool those people, the people that I'm mentioning that loved her, because Cleo lived in a primarily white community. And all of these people that I'm referring to, her godsons and everything, they were white people, which is nothing wrong with that. But this black woman who she knew at that performing performing art school in Seattle, this black woman, she was saying that Cleo was able to fool those white people because, you know, black people would have seen her game. They would have seen her game or whatever. And, you know, I don't know about that. You know, I don't know about that. You know, um, I just think that there are three versions of what's happening here: lies, truth, and half truths. And I think that the truth is that Cleo was exploited too. Because when the government came in to shut down that psychic network business, they came after Cleo until she told them, wait a minute, I'm just an employee for that agency. She was like, I'm an employee for that agency. I don't own it. And it was two white men behind the scenes the entire time that owned the agency: Stephen Fetter and Peter Stoltz. And the government, they went after them. And even the government said, Even the government said there was no indication that Cleo was making the same amount of money. There were no tax returns. There was no financial evidence to prove that Cleo was making the money that Peter Stoltz and Stephen Fetter was making. So they dismissed the charges against Cleo. So she was vindicated. She was vindicated when it came to that. But because they used her image, they used her energy and her image to make all of those billions of dollars. And she didn't get none of it. And this continues to happen to Black women in the music industry, in the movie industry. Why hasn't Angela Bassett won an Academy Award yet for Best Actress, Best Lead Actress in a movie? Why hasn't another Black actress won an Academy Award in the category for Best Leading Actress? How come Angela Bassett and Viola Davis are not on the same level as a Meryl Streep or Shirley MacLaine or Angelina Jolie? Raven Simone, why aren't you on the same level as a what? Let me think. I can't think of any right now. It'll come to me. Why isn't Raven Simone on the same level as a Miley Cyrus? You're not. You should be. But she's not. You know, so Black women are constantly exploited in whatever industry they go in, and even in everyday life, Black women are exploited. And they use your likeness and your image to make money, to do all types of spell work. Same thing with Mabel King from What's Happening, who played the mother in What's Happening. I know they say she had diabetes and she lost one of her arms to diabetes, but my thing is, what did they do with that arm? I ain't never heard of nobody's arm getting cut off for no diabetes. What did they do with Mabel King's arm? Because Mabel King was a witch. She was a powerful one too. She may not even known her own power. I don't know. We getting so wrapped up in everything else, but we don't look at how Black women are being exploited right up under our nose all the time. And Miss Cleo was a prime example of that type of exploitation. She was a prime example of that. Whether people believe that she was authentic or not, I'm looking at the exploitation of Miss Cleo and how she was used to make almost $1 billion, and she didn't see any of that money. And that's according to the feds. The feds even said Miss Cleo didn't make any of that money. It was Stephen Fetter and Peter Stoltz. And this happens to Black women all the time. All the time. They never want to pay Black women their worth. Never. They never do. And even though I really, really don't vibe with her anymore, Monique, the comedian, she was right about a lot of the shit she was saying, even though she was scamming and pandering to the Black community. And now you don't even hear from her no more. Now that she got what she wanted. But she was still right, though. In some ways, she was right. Black women don't get paid with their worth. They do want to undercut Black women, but then they want to make millions upon millions of dollars off of you. Just like Black women patronize a lot of these Asian stores for hair and nail care and stuff, and then when you go in there, they want to treat you like shit. But they have $1 billion industry that they're making off of Black women, when Black women should really be the ones in that industry making the $1 billion. That should be Black women's industry. Truth be told. Black women, not Black gay men, but Black women. Because back in the day, black women, look at Madam C.J. Walker. And it's like, even with Madam C.J. Walker, it's like her empire really doesn't even exist anymore. Or is someone else benefiting off of her face and likeness and image and name behind the scenes? Because that happens too often to black women, too often. And that's what happened to Miss Cleo. Whether she was, a real psychic or not, I'm not here to debate that. I'm looking at the facts of how her likeness and her image was used and abused, and how those two white men made money off of her image. And it ain't just white men that do that shit to black women. Black men do it too. Black men do that motherfucking shit too. Some of the richest people in this world have made their money off of the backs of black women. America was built off of the back of the mammy and black women, off of that energy. If it wasn't for the black woman breastfeeding and giving those white babies milk, they wouldn't have had the strength to do the things that they did in America. Let's be motherfucking honest. Anyway, I just felt like talking. That's all I have to say. Whether Miss Cleo was a fake psychic or not, like I said, I'm not here to debate that. I'm talking about how she was used. How she was used and abused. Like most black women are when they go into these types of sectors of society. And they never get the credit that they deserve. I can go on and on and on and on. Even the recipe for KFC, I heard that came from a black woman, and that racist colonel stole it. And he made billions of dollars off of her fucking recipe. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.